All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started with our webinar today. Um, my name is Melanie Ridley. I'm a QI consultant with the Health Alliance of Northern California, and I'm joined today by Tricia Cook. Tricia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, I guess. Tricia Cook here at North Coast Clinics Network.
Great. And we're here talking about project management tools for quality improvement, building and facilitating teams. And we really appreciate you being with us for this webinar. During this session, we're going to be talking about some aspects of project management that many of you may find helpful in organizing and facilitating quality improvement work. This training module is part of the collaborative work of the two consortia, Health Alliance of Northern California and North Coast Clinics Network, with Partnership Health Plan to build capacity in the region for quality improvement. You as leaders of quality in your organizations may find yourselves in the position of supporting teams as they undertake improvement efforts. And today's session is designed to provide a high-level overview of project management basics for improvement teams and to take an in-depth look at the tools and strategies for using team meetings to keep momentum in your improvement efforts and to effectively plan, execute, and spread your team's change ideas. This training module is being developed as a supplement to the ABCs of QI training. This is the second in a series of webinars that will be offered as a follow-on to the ABCs of QI training itself. The first module on root cause analysis is available online, and we will make sure and share that with you by email after today's session. So just a note on some audio instructions so that you can help navigate as we go. As I mentioned, as you log in today, you're currently muted, and this is just to reduce background noise as we go through some of the initial content for our session. This webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available after our session today. We will unmute your lines later because we do want a lot of engagement and discussion, and we'll take questions and answers as well. There are controls for Zoom if you're not familiar with this platform up the top. If you sort of hover at the top of the presentation slides, and you can see who's joining the presentation today. You can also access the chat box, and we'd be happy to take questions as we go through the chat. So feel free to connect with us as we go along. So let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be talking about some tools for engaging and leading teams for improvement. And we hope by the end of today's session that you'll be able to understand how to bring the right team members together to offer a variety of perspectives and expertise to support your improvement projects. We're going to learn how to lead productive, efficient, and fun meetings that team members want to attend and practice using some tools that help teams to generate ideas and make decisions. Before I dive into the content, just want to make sure that everyone's audio and connections are working well. If you're having any trouble hearing anything, please feel free to chat in. Let us know if you're having any trouble hearing throughout the session today. All right. So, project management. Hopefully we're all in our journey of understanding the model for improvement that we talked about during the ABCs of QI training and how this framework can serve as a roadmap in organizing our improvement work. And Partnership Health Plan offers the ABCs of QI training throughout Northern California region to help spread the core knowledge and skills for working within the model for improvement. PDSA cycles are a method for learning about our system and testing changes on a small scale to identify changes that will lead to improvement and then implement those changes that we have a high certainty of belief will drive positive change. And what we want to talk about today are the tools and strategies that you as facilitators, coaches, and project managers can use in your work to manage and coordinate the various activities and people involved in improvement work. This is what we're referring to as project management. So project management defined is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet your project requirements. So let's look a little bit more about what that means. For your improvement work, there's probably 4 phases of project management. And the first phase is initiating and framing of your project. This step involves conducting the research or learning about your system to clearly define and articulate what need is driving the project. In this phase, you do research, you talk to stakeholders, and create an overview of the project that will help to gain buy-in and bring along some prospective team members. You might use some tools like root cause analysis, driver diagram, or stakeholder analysis in this phase. In the second phase, you're planning your project, you're building your improvement or project team, you're creating a step-by-step plan of how you'll execute the project, determining what needs to be done, by when, and who will do it. And you will also establish your measures and targets for achievement. Some of the tools used during this phase are your project charter, so you can keep all of this organized and documented. If you're using the lean methodology, you may use an A3. You might develop a process map or journey map and communication plan as part of this phase. The third phase is executing the project, where you implement your project plan, work with your team, and sustain momentum on your PDSAs. You're collecting data and reporting on project progress. And some of the tools used during this phase are your PDSA worksheet to capture all that you're doing and learning, and reporting data through your run chart. The fourth phase is closing and transitioning, and this phase concludes the PDSAs and the intensive data collection. And this is when your team would focus on changes to adopt and/or how to spread change ideas. Documentation of the project and what you learned is key, and some of the tools you might use for this are a storyboard or a project charter. Some examples of projects that you're currently managing are listed on the screen. This might seem familiar to you, and so we're just trying to give you some examples of tools and strategies that you might apply to this work, and building effective process and helping your teams really work through this in an efficient manner. We're going to review some tools today and really take time to talk about, in particular, addressing the human side of change. So how we build and manage teams to drive all of this great work forward within our organizations. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we're building high-performing teams. And I'll say many of you are probably already doing this and leading teams. And so we really want to hear from you and what this looks like within your organization. We're going to start by asking you to think about when you've been engaged in quality improvement work. As you think about teams that you've been involved in, teams that work well together towards a common goal, what does that look like? What has your experience been? Can you think about a time when you were a member of what you think of as a high-performing team? And using the chat, we hope you'll share with us just a few thoughts about what that looks like. A few adjectives describing this team, some phrases that describe how the members work together, what made that team special. So I'm going to give you a few moments, and if you wouldn't mind bringing up your chat box, if you have any trouble, let us know. But really thinking about what makes that team special. So some of the things coming in: strong communication skills, right? Good communication, positive attitude. Absolutely. Having time away from direct patient care, right? Really carving out that time to focus on the team and the work of the team. willingness to share ideas and listen, motivated, creative, supportive, great listening, and trust within the team. Absolutely. Clear goals driving the work of the team. Absolutely. Having a shared vision. These are all great examples, and we're going to talk more about each of these things in our session today, because you're right, these are the things that do help drive great teamwork. So thanks for sending in your thoughts. We appreciate it. And I think you'll see reflected here a lot of what you just mentioned. And there are different ways of thinking about teams, but really we see 5 important traits or characteristics of high-performing teams. So trust, I know, was mentioned, conflict management, commitment, accountability, and results orientation. And I think that was really reflected in what you all shared. So trust really is a core trait of a high-performing team and the foundation of a good team. Trust is about being vulnerable at times or being open to sharing. And trust is gained through time and evidence within the team. So it really does take that time away from direct patient care, as was mentioned, to build that trust within team members. And, evidence that if there are concerns or problems, that they're addressed together as a team. Conflict management. So great relationships are not characterized by the absence of conflict, but by the ability to repair after a break. And things that are damaging to our relationships include passive or sarcastic comments and gossip. So we really want to make sure that we're very transparent in our teams, bringing any conflicts to the table and discussing them together in a really positive way. Commitment to our teams. And buy-in for a team doesn't require consensus. Sometimes it means putting the needs of the team above what you may think personally or what you prefer, and bringing that commitment to achieving the shared goal for your team. Accountability. High standards drive accountability. Sometimes accountability has a negative connotation, but it's not necessarily so. Accountability is simply having some standards we're working towards and taking personal responsibility, and having leaders who remind our team members that there are certain things that we've made a commitment to. And that can really help build that trust and that engagement of the whole team. And then focusing on results. It really means that we're all working towards that shared goal. It's not about us as individuals, and that as a team, we succeed together. There are a lot of different strengths and skills that each of us bring to our teams, and really high effective and high performing teams leverage all of those strengths. And so think about who in your group is a really strong leader. How do we really leverage that strength when we bring together our team? How do we encourage everyone to be a strong team player? Who in our group is a really good researcher or questioner, and how do we bring that forward and use that to advance our work? What content experts do we have available to us? Who's a really good planner? Who's creative? And who's a good communicator? And how do we put them in positions to really utilize their skills and their strengths to drive our work forward? So giving some thought to who's on our team and what they bring to the team is really important, especially as at the beginning. Just some basics. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page and have some key agreements in place. What's the purpose or the goal for gathering this team? Do we have a shared understanding of that? Who needs to be at the table? Do we have the right people on the team? How often will the team meet to gather, to plan, execute, and learn together? What does that look like, and what's a reasonable commitment? What are the roles and responsibilities of the team members? And what are the team's rules of engagement or agreements? Setting those right at the beginning helps everyone to be comfortable in how this team is going to work. The project charter can be used as a central place to keep a lot of this information organized. And we shared a project charter template at the close of the ABCs of QI training session. In it, there is a place to document your project team, describe what the role is for each team member, and then outline some of the basic responsibilities of the team. So some responsibilities that you may illuminate on this form include who's assigned to do the work or responsible to do certain aspects of the work. Who's accountable, meaning they have to make the final decision or they have ultimate ownership of this change. Who needs to be consulted before decisions are made, and then who needs to be informed after a decision has been taken. Really clarifying who has what responsibility as part of the team can help drive clear communication and expectations. So one of the main functions or strategies that we use to build our team is meetings. And so we want to talk a little bit about how we use our time together as teams to really build that team and drive effective action. And I'm going to hand it over to Tricia for this next activity.
All right. So again, we would love to get some interaction on the chat as we kick off this next section around why meetings are important. So when we are engaged in quality improvement work, it's really important to have a team that works well together, as you all shared, towards a common goal, you know, whether that goal is improving immunization rates, or even just the numbers of participants in a particular program that you're running. So if folks can just chime in on the chat, I feel good about meetings when. What are the kind of concrete or maybe abstract things that make for a really effective meeting in your eyes? We have some, they are over. Does that mean that we don't have them at all? They are productive. Tangents are kept to a minimum. I learned something new when others learn something new. So kind of building on each other's ideas. A good use of time. When it may be very action oriented. So it's not just talking about things over and over again, and having that person, that facilitator that can drive that with very clear objectives and goals. Organized is coming up a whole lot. That agenda being a great tool. Decisions being made. So again, going back to having meetings be very action oriented. Getting the agenda ahead of time. Feeling heard, so some of that more abstract, more of the people side of meetings. No one blames or disrupts, so everybody kind of coming to the table with a shared responsibility to work towards those actions. Everyone is allowed to contribute and respected. No soapboxing. Again, kind of logistics, right? An hour and a half or less to the point with clear next steps. Sticking to the agenda and all the necessary participants present to discuss global applications. So that idea of having the right people at the table and also consistent participation. Sometimes that's a really good indicator of whether your meetings are really effective if the attendance starts dropping off, or if you don't have the right people at the table in a consistent manner to really push those action steps forward. So thank you everyone for those contributions. So again, you know, what we'll talk about and dive into in these next sections is what does make that meeting really effective, and what makes it effective is paying attention to both kind of those concrete things like the agenda, the scope of the meeting, that there's a goal. And then there's kind of the more abstract or not so tangible things that have that feeling sometime of, does the meeting feel valued by folks? Do people feel like they can be heard and shared their ideas effectively? So really, when we have effective meetings, we're able to maximize the strengths of our teams, encourage a variety of perspectives, and support those team members in achieving those goals and those actions and recognizing their interests and achievements along the way. Next slide, please. So with that, one of the biggest payoffs of a really big meeting and why it's so important to keep that in the forefront of our minds is because it's really the forum for the team to conduct the work and to feel successful in that work. And the result of that, if we're able to produce that effective forum, is that we get the results and the team gets built up. They're energized by the idea, and they have a clear kind of road to where they're going, a shared goal and purpose to what they're doing. And again, kind of going back to what Melanie was talking about of creating those high performing teams, with that, the members are sharing tasks and accountability when they're coming to that table, because they're all responsible for their role and the contributions in a meeting as well as the project as a whole. And then members are recognized for their achievements. You know, a lot of times we have some big issues that we need to discuss, or big projects that everybody might not initially feel so jazzed about. And so really celebrating what people are bringing to the table, the strengths that they're bringing to the table, and the wins that you're making along the way. And so all in all, the meeting is the space to recognize the value of the team and also to encourage that idea of personal accountability. And so we can show through our meetings that we're not only valuing those actions and those results, but the actual individuals that are around the table as well. Next slide, please. The other kind of outcome that can come from a really effective meeting is it can create and actually support organizational culture across the organization. That room is that meeting is the representation of what we're trying to achieve culturally across our organizations. And so again, it's both that feeling that people walk away that their time has been valued, that their ideas have been encouraged, that problems aren't only glossed over, but we're proactively asking for them to be revealed and then engaging in a supportive conversation to find solutions to address them. And that it's bigger than all of us, as we just went over, that the good is for all of us, and that we can work through any of those obstacles. Next slide, please. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie, and she's going to introduce the meeting cycle.
Great. So a lot of work goes into, as you all know, planning for meetings, thinking about how to make them work effectively, executing your meeting, facilitating it in real time, and then the follow-up. And this is a cycle. This is an ongoing process throughout your project. So it doesn't have one start and one stop, but it's ongoing. So in the planning phase, we're outlining the meeting purpose and our outcomes for each meeting. We're establishing what the decision-making process looks like. We're creating those agendas that is so helpful to share in advance, and we're making sure that the right people are at the table so that we can make decisions, we can have the right input to what we're discussing. During meetings, we want to make sure We're opening them on time with clarity of what our purpose is and reinforcing that commitment to the team, what that expectation is. We want to make sure we're facilitating conversations in a productive manner, encouraging participation from all of our team members. We want to make sure we have space so that we can all consider alternative perspectives and keep our meetings on track. And we want to use tools and strategies that will help our teams to brainstorm. Everyone has a place to put input, to make decisions, be action-oriented, and to complete tasks that need doing. And then we want to make sure that we are evaluating our meetings, understanding what worked for our group, what we want to change for next time, and closing on time, right? All these things are really important. And then there's that follow-up phase of the cycle. How are we checking in with people in between meetings to make sure that those action items we outlined get done in between meetings? What do people need in order to complete that? Or is there going to be a delay? And just understanding how things are going outside of the meeting. All of these are important phases of the process. And we want to make sure we understand who's responsible for all of this work, because it is work. And so is that our project manager, our team leader, our facilitator? Who do we have on our team that can help make sure all of these things are happening? Being really clear about who's doing what as part of this meeting cycle is really critical. There's also sort of the basics of helping make sure you have a great team meeting. So securing the meeting room and making sure you have a little buffer time before and after so that people aren't rushed. Share the calendar invite so people know when and where. Send out a reminder and the agenda or other materials in advance. Starting our meeting on time and ending our meetings on time. Really key, as you've pointed out. Have some fun, make sure everyone feels valued. This is going to make everyone want to come to the meetings, and you'll have that consistent attendance, hopefully. And then make sure you're checking in with team members in between on progress. Just a good sort of checklist to kind of keep in front of yourself as you're managing teams and team meetings. So in the planning phase, just kind of getting a little bit more into the details, when you're prioritizing and valuing the time and input of people on your team, maybe asking these questions will help you to support your teams towards their shared goals and activities. So a meeting like an email or a huddle is a tool to demonstrate and reinforce your organizational culture, as Tricia shared, and to get work done. So being really clear about what's the purpose or the goal for gathering the team, who needs to be at the table, what are the characteristics of the team that we have with us and how do they like to engage, and how much time will we need to accomplish each activity in our agenda. So you might have a meeting to hear and learn about the recent PDSA and how it went. You may need most of the team, but maybe not all the team. Maybe the executive sponsor isn't necessarily needed for that part of the team activity. Your team, in thinking about their characteristics, they may be very extroverted and they really want to get together in person. So having that dedicated in-person time is important for that team. But it may only need to be about 15 minutes. Not every meeting has to be an hour. So what time do we need to really, quickly learn about that PDSA and keep everyone on the same page? Now for another team, they may like to digest information a little bit more slowly. So for that team, you might want to consider sending information out via email on what was learned through the PDSA or what happened, giving them some time to really read through that and think about it, and then gathering. So you really have to be mindful of the characteristics of your team to understand that. If your team is at a point where you need to do a brainstorm of change ideas, that's going to take more time. So in thinking about that kind of a meeting, you're going to want more time set aside, maybe an hour, maybe a little longer. And you might want to broaden who's invited to that meeting to make sure your executive sponsors there and maybe some other content experts, people really close to the process that you're addressing, so that you have the right inputs to that process. So just some things to think about as you're scheduling your meetings. Meetings aren't always the right vehicle for sharing information with our team. And I think that's an important point too, that sometimes it's okay not to meet. Sometimes the way to share information may be through another tool. So when you need to meet as a team might be to brainstorm ideas. That's something really done together in person or through maybe video connection if in person's not possible. If you need to accomplish a task as a team, make a big decision that requires a lot of input and discussion, you'll want to gather the team. If you have to explore some more complex information and you might want to do an activity that helps your team to really explore that a little further, or if you need to resolve a conflict, you want to get that team together. But when you're thinking about ways just to deliver information and updates, providing updates may not be the best thing to do in a meeting. It might be more appropriate to send that out via an email or a report. If your project is in a holding pattern, it's okay to cancel meetings and say, we'll reconnect once we're back on track or things are moving again. And when you need to make a small decision, that might be more effective to do via email through a vote than convening the team. So really thinking about when you need to meet and when it's okay not to meet and to do your information sharing through other ways. So there are some kind of broad purposes for meetings, things that you're trying to accomplish through your meeting that you'll want to define in advance. So some meetings are focused on more strategic thinking, especially at the start of a project. You might have some visioning that requires people coming together and thinking about where you want to end up at the end of your project or your process. You want to set clear expectations. So as teams take on problem solving, you understand, how to gain more knowledge about the problem, who to bring into your meetings, content experts maybe, how you get to the root causes of some of the problems, how you ask those critical questions about what you're really trying to solve. So problem solving may be one purpose for your group to get together. Another type of meeting is more on the education and explanation. And this requires maybe having handouts prepared in advance, maybe sharing some videos or doing an activity for your group that helps them to understand necessary information, enhance knowledge around the issue that you're dealing with, and really propel your QI project forward. And then you might have the need to make some decisions as a team, and you really want to clearly outline what the decisions are that need to be made and what's the process you're going to use for making those decisions. Is that through consensus? Is that through voting? How are you going to get to that decision? Making sure everyone understands that in advance is really going to support effective team management. I think we saw in the chat the importance of an agenda. So agendas really do help drive effective meetings, and using a standard meeting agenda template for each of your meetings will help your team become accustomed to how your time together is going to go and how you organize the content and the actions. The agenda tool can also be used to record action items and what was agreed upon during meetings, who's responsible, and the timelines, so that you're able to store that in one kind of standard place for the team. As we heard you all say, it's really important to set that agenda in advance. You might want to collect agenda items from your team well in advance of the meeting in case there are things that are coming up that need to be addressed that you may not be aware of as the project manager. And you want to think about how much time you're going to need for each agenda item, making sure you can accomplish everything in the time you have allowed, and ordering those agenda items. So your team may want to warm up a little bit into a meeting before you take on a really complex issue. You also may want to stagger agenda items that are a little quicker to take up and complete, as opposed to some that take a little bit longer time to work through. And staggering those can help your team feel a sense of accomplishment and progress. You want to make sure that if you have a longer meeting, say you do have that hour-and-a-half long meeting, take a break. Give people a chance to stand up, stretch, get some water. Having that plan for a break is important. And then having the agenda available during the meeting so everyone understands where we are and what's happening. We've offered some agenda templates. These are just examples. The template on the left is the 7-step meeting agenda. So it actually clearly outlines the process that the meeting is going to go through, as well as the content for the agenda. And using this 7-step meeting agenda, you can also record action items and the documentation of what happened during the meeting right in this, creating that meeting record. On the right-hand side, we have the 3 Ps agenda, and this is taken from the Lean methodology, where you clearly outline on your agenda the purpose for your meeting, the process, meaning how will we go through and accomplish our purpose for the day, the topics, the discussions, the decisions that need to be made, and the methods for getting that done. And then the payoff. What's the benefit at the end of this meeting, and what are we creating, or what problem have we solved? So these are examples of meeting templates. And we have this, is an example of that 7-step meeting agenda filled out. Clearly defining the roles of different team members who are going to take us through leading the team itself, who's facilitating the meeting, who's recording the notes. And you might rotate that because you have a few great facilitators on your team and sharing the burden of recording notes. So you might have an agenda template that you prefer. Doesn't really matter, just using kind of a standard tool so that you have a way of accurately recording your agendas and then also capturing your notes. And we're going to pause there for just a minute and just say, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to chat those into the chat box, and we'll be happy to take questions as we go along. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end, so there'll be lots of time for your questions. Then I'm going to turn it over to Tricia, and we'll talk a little bit about the meeting itself.
Great, thanks, Melanie. Next slide, please. All right, so as Melanie had pointed out in the agenda, having roles clearly laid out is essential to making that meeting go as smoothly as possible. And it also kind of lets folks know what to expect or anticipate. And so in every meeting, you're generally going to have 3 or 4 different roles that you'll want to think about how you want to approach. And so generally the leader, the project leader, is assigned ahead of a project starting. And so they're really thinking about, is the meeting needed? They're the ones that are thinking about tracking the project and what actions need to be taken in order to achieve success and move the project forward. So they're the one kind of planning the agenda, defining the decision-making process, assigning meeting roles, and then following up on action items. And really with the leader, figuring out maybe there's a project leader for the project as a whole, But sometimes if you're in a position where you really want to focus on building that team and creating cohesiveness, thinking about having folks take on leading the meeting, you know, being the facilitator for that meeting and trying on those new skills could be one approach. And so that could be, you know, each team member rotating, you know, for a different meeting. That could be that maybe there's one person that's super interested in that, or that kind of fits in their skill set. And so they would be the facilitator for every team meeting that you have. So just kind of thinking through whether you want to assign roles each meeting, or from the beginning, and everyone just keeps that same role throughout the project. And so that facilitator is really the person in the meeting that's guiding the conversation. They're guiding the group through the agenda, as folks had commented, keeping everybody kind of on task and target for what the goal of the meeting is. They're the ones that are ensuring that everyone has kind of equal speaking opportunities, and maybe engaging those folks that either need to kind of step back and let others share, or encouraging those folks that maybe have yet to contribute. They're kind of the cheerleader in a sense, maintaining that positive and supportive atmosphere, and then kind of summarizing, bringing the team together at the end and going over what the action steps are. And then the recorder is that person, that key person who's recording the history, right, of what happened in that meeting, what decisions were made, what conclusions were made, what action items, and then compiling the notes into some sort of standard format. And sometimes I think with meeting minutes, they can get rather laborious. And so really, when you're thinking about your format, focusing on really the action items and the conclusions, rather than kind of trying to capture every little thing that was said or done in the meeting. It will make the recorder very happy and the team very happy. When the team sees that email coming through as a follow-up post the meeting, and they see 3 or 4 bullets, that's much easier for a team to digest, rather than a 2 or 3 page meeting minutes. So again, focusing on that meetings being a point to activate your team. And then also you can see that we listed participant here. And I think sometimes in meetings, we can kind of feel like, oh, we're just the participant. And really recognizing that the participant is a key component to making an effective meeting. And so kind of setting those expectations of that role early on from the beginning, that the expectation is people will come to the meeting having looked at the agenda, that they are in that encouraged space, will share and contribute to the items that are on the agenda and the goal of the meeting, that they have equal role in contributing to the positive atmosphere of the group. And then 2, that reflection to when is it a time to present an idea, and can I as a participant do that concisely with an awareness of the time that the meeting is going to be running. Next slide, please. So in figuring out how you're going to approach the roles at the meetings, then one of the very first steps when first bringing a team together is creating a group agreement. And some folks may know this as setting ground rules, or there's other terms for this kind of strategy. And a lot of times I've seen in meetings that ground rules kind of get set at the beginning and then everyone kind of forgets them, or they never get referenced again. So really putting a priority on this and not losing sight of the group agreement, that it's it's kind of almost like a vision statement for the group, created by the group is a very crucial part of that process. And so the aim here is basically to create the norm. What is the norm for the meetings that we want to do that will create a safe and respectful space in which people can work together productively? So essentially, a group agreement is a set of statements that set the tone for how people will engage with one another and essentially behave in a meeting. It might include things like try to understand where everyone is coming from, even when you disagree, allowing everyone opportunity to speak, confidentiality, mobile phones switched off or on silent. So the key thing about the group agreement is given by its very name, right? That existence of the word agreement. To really have and use this tool effectively, it has to be created and agreed upon by the entire group. Because if that consensus isn't reached, then it doesn't hold any value for that group. And so then you'll see things start to kind of fall by the wayside. And then keeping that group agreement at every meeting so that it's actually visible to everyone, and referencing it, either picking out one of the characteristics and incorporating that into your icebreaker or the intro of the meeting so that it remains fresh and continues to hold its value throughout the project. Next slide. So icebreakers are another way, as Melanie was mentioning before, we kind of have that double aspect of we're trying to accomplish our actions, but we also use meetings as a way to do team building. And in addition to that, thinking about the purpose of our meeting. What are we trying to accomplish in that meeting? And trying to connect our icebreakers to that, where we're starting off either in a kind of low risk activity, or if our teams are maybe more developed and more cohesive, maybe a higher risk, but just something that people can ease into the meeting before kind of just diving into all the action steps. So there's a couple different ways to approach icebreakers. You can just have something that's fun, a way for folks to get to know each other a little bit more. Or you can think of it in terms of what is the purpose of your meeting. So for example, if your purpose was you needed to kind of introduce the idea of a plan, do, study, act and how it's done and the importance of it. So maybe your icebreaker would be a fun activity that introduces the PDSA in an engaging way. So the example here, as you can see, is a peg jump game. And as Melanie mentioned earlier, we will send out a bunch of handouts to you post the webinar. And so this is a fun game. If you've ever gone to a restaurant and seen the little game board that's on the table, it's like a little triangle and it has pegs in it. And basically the goal of the game is to jump over a peg, and the one that you jump over, you get to take out. And so you have the teams, you give them a little triangle, you can use whatever paper clips or pennies and cover up all the little numbers. And you have the team say, okay, I want you to get down to, say if you're using pennies, 1 penny left on the board. And so you have folks do that. And then you ask them, well, how did you do that? And most folks will be like, oh, I don't know how I did that. So it kind of leads into a great discussion about the importance of testing ideas and paying attention to how we're accomplishing them, which is what the PDSA allows us to do. The other kind of sample icebreaker, when you have kind of a smaller group, 5 to 10 people, there's a great curriculum online called the High Touch Critical Soft Skills Curriculum. And they have multiple modules focused on healthcare in general. So not specifically quality improvement, but the topics really overlap with a lot of the skills and behaviors that we're trying to achieve in our teams, working on quality improvement. So there's things around team building and communication. So one of the small activities in that is to have folks talk about the positive and negative behaviors that happen in the workplace, and what is the effect on that? You know, how do positive behaviors create an effective workplace, and how do negative behaviors kind of take away from that? And so one of the handouts that we'll send out to you has all the modules on it with a link to them online, and they're really easily accessible. And then lastly, if you have a larger group, there's a bunch of great activities out there. One of the ones that we wanted to highlight with you today is called the 4 Directions activity. So we've been kind of mentioning throughout today's webinar about thinking through the different personalities and characteristics of the folks that you have on the team, and really getting to know what motivates people, what appeals to them, how can we kind of access and elevate their strengths that they're bringing to the table, and also encourage them to kind of put on different hats and challenge themselves to improve themselves. And so the 4 Directions activity kind of starts that process of teams reflecting on who they are and how they operate and what motivates them, and then how do the personalities and behaviors of others either complement or maybe sometimes rub up against each other. And so just starting off the process to expand people's minds about the multiple contributions of each person, and how we can help elevate them and work through conflict together. Next slide. So with that, we're gonna jump into an activity. It'll just take me 1 second to bring up the whiteboard that we'll be using. And so I will need folks' help with this activity. So if you can queue yourselves up on the chat. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna dive into kind of that activity that I was talking about, passion for the job and positive behaviors that help create an effective workplace. And those behaviors more on the negative side that might take away from that workplace being effective. So you can either at this point, oops. In the chat, or you can unmute yourselves. If you can share some of the positive behaviors that would create an effective workplace. And Melanie, my chat is not coming up for some reason. So could you kind of tell me what folks are chatting in?
Absolutely. So we have listening, engagement, eye contact, communicative leadership.
Y'all are challenging me for my spelling skills today.
Dependability, a detail orientation, respect, positive attitude, open-minded.
And how about one more?
One more. Trying to see what we don't have yet reflected. Let's say task-oriented.
And then, so thinking about these things, and I am wholeheartedly on board with everyone that's on here, the idea of those communication skills, of letting folks know that we're hearing them by listening and eye contact, engaging the conversation, respect, positive attitude. All of these are really going to support people in contributing on a daily basis in the workplace. So on the counter of that, what are some things that kind of make it hard, or are the things that you get up in the morning and you're like, oh, I don't want to deal with that? What are the things that make it hard to come to work or make that workplace effective?
Bad attitude.
Right. So when folks are coming in and just frown or scowl on their face, doesn't necessarily create a very productive or positive environment.
Gossip.
Gossip can spread like wildfire and really kind of get us distracted, right, from what we're trying to accomplish, and can also create barriers between people.
We have favoritism. We'll say lack of engagement. Getting off topic. So I don't know if that's lack of focus or organization. Interruption.
That can be a real trigger for folks, for feeling if they're constantly being interrupted. Interruption. Sorry. Can really get in the way of people feeling heard and also getting things accomplished, whether that interruption is interruptions in the day where you're trying to get your work done and you're constantly interrupted, or when you're actually trying to express yourself and folks are kind of cutting off your line of thinking.
Yeah, lack of collaboration. That may be similar to lack of engagement, but it could be a little different too. Using phones during meetings. Identifying problems with no ideas for solutions. Oh,
All right.
there's some good comments here. You guys are good at this. Let's see. There's a lot of good stuff here. I'm going to say ineffective process. And let's add one more just because they're all good. It's hard. Hidden agendas, which I would also put at lack of transparency, but.
You don't want me to spell out transparency, right?
Okay.
So just a couple people comment, I've commented on a couple of these, and then number 8, using phones during meetings. It's a catch-22 with distraction, right? What we're trying to I think what we're trying to kind of get at with that is this idea of distraction, like someone's full attention is not on task at hand. And so sometimes we do need to, because I've heard this also said about, people will be like, no phones, no computers, nothing. Like you can't bring anything in with you. And just some people sometimes need, and this might seem counter to folks, need distraction in order to focus. So for instance, you may see the folks that bring knitting into a meeting, or they have some other thing that they might be doing. And I've always been surprised at the folks. I was facilitating a couple meetings, and there was a gentleman on his computer, and I asked him a question about some very complex things that the group that we had all just been talking about. And he summarized perfectly for me what the group had been talking about, even though he was on his computer. And so just balancing that, we can still create culture as long as people may demonstrate their engagement in different ways. I do often in meetings will tell people, I know we all have lives and distractions, so please put your phones on silent. And if you need to step out to attend to something, please step out of the room to take care of that. So there's ways to kind of meet in the middle where we're not necessarily ostracizing particular personality types. And I've also pulled team members out, after the meeting, asked to kind of just check in with them. And I said to them, hey, even though I know that you're paying attention, the rest of the group doesn't really feel that you're engaged. So how can we come up with some strategies so that we've got that team being built? And usually people are pretty approachable about that.
Trisha, I also want to address a couple of things that came in through the chat that didn't quite make it on our list of negative behaviors, but I think is really important to call out. And there were a couple of comments related to power imbalance. I think it came up under favoritism a little bit, maybe some belittling behavior, and then hierarchy. And I think that's a really important point to pull out, because we work in organizations that have organizational structures, and that I think when it comes to teams and team meetings, what we were talking about in terms of culture is just so important, because that can help deal with some of those behaviors. So setting those norms, making sure that you're creating a culture within your meetings that values everyone's opinion, that underscores the importance of respect for one another, and is open to alternative perspectives, but also recognizing that at times we have some folks that have to be the ones to make a decision. So keeping that balance of making sure that we're creating the culture where everyone feels valued and part of the team, and also recognizing that we're working within an organizational structure. And it's a tough balance, but it's one that project managers and team leaders are going to really struggle with.
Yeah, and I think that one of the key characteristics, if we can foster in every member of our team, and especially if we're the leader of the team, is that idea of reflection, because there are power dynamics, and being cognizant of that and reflective upon that, and then building structures that allow people to navigate that power construct. So for example, if there's disagreement in a group, that there's an agreed upon process by which that gets sorted out, whether that's, inside or outside of the meeting, that those structures are made clear, and that they're there, that they actually exist, that the project leader has put thought to that. Because you're right, Melanie, that is something that will come up. And going back to like the hidden agendas, like all of these things, in order to deal with conflict effectively, make decisions that people can get behind, we have to create more transparency in all of these things. So I want to thank we got some great participation in this. If I was actually facilitating this activity in person, one of the things that I would do with the group would be just to dive in a little bit more, to define, for instance, what does respect mean to people? Because some of those more abstract concepts can mean slightly different things. Some people don't get turned off if someone, by someone's body language, whereas for another person, if that person were to, tap their pencil on the table repetitively, would see that as a sign of disrespect. So really teasing out some of those more abstract concepts, so folks have a better perception of what their team members, how they're looking at it and how they're defining it. So with this, what we'd like to do now is to poll everyone of the top 3, like if you had to narrow down and only choose your top 3 positive behaviors that make for an exceptional workplace, which of the 3 here on the left would you pick? So I'm gonna bring up the poll. And so everyone hopefully can see the poll. And basically, if you choose number 1, you're saying listening. If you choose number 2 on the poll, you're choosing engagement, so on and so forth. So I'll give folks a sec to chime in on their top 3. And it looks like right now, respect and positive attitude are in the lead. So I'll give you another 10 seconds for those folks who want to participate. Looks like we have most. All right. So when our results for our poll show, let's see, positive attitude coming in first, and then respect coming in second, and then third, engagement, so team engagement.
Are you able to share those results?
Oh, sorry. Can we see them now?
Yep.
Wonderful. So with that, again, kind of taking a step back out of the webinar and kind of giving how one might approach this activity in person, in kind of delving out those top 3, then inviting the group to kind of create a statement, kind of like a vision statement, for getting engagement, for getting and supporting a positive attitude, and again, for respect, and kind of teasing those out. And then essentially those would become kind of what I like to call the team creed. So similar to the group agreement, just kind of the norm for the group and the expectation of the group that whenever we get together, these are the behaviors that each of us on this team want to display so that we can push this work forward. And then in doing that, Sorry, Melanie, real quick check-in. Is the poll down on everyone's screens? If it's not, everyone should be able to X out of the poll box in the upper right-hand corner. Okay, great. And so also in this activity, the next step would be to look at all those negative behaviors and think about how each of us individually, you know, whether it's on our worst day or what we may tend to kind of lean towards when we're feeling stressed out, and to choose one of these behaviors that we know that we might be more prone to, and to come up with kind of a goal or strategy to counter that, so that we are, as team members, committing to reflecting upon our negative behaviors and putting action, putting energy forth in coming up with some sort of strategy that we agree and commit to that we'll take on should we kind of fall into those behaviors. So this activity can be a really great icebreaker and team building activity to use with your teams as they develop.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back to the presentation.
All right, so with brainstorming, some of the key things just to keep in mind and is, again, brainstorming can get kind of dull at times. People can kind of feel like no new ideas are coming out, or they may feel that one idea is being thrown out and kind of groupthink is happening where everyone's kind of latching on to one person's idea. So on the slide here is just a link to a couple quick videos. I don't think they're over like 4 minutes, but it's called the 6-3-5 method. And it's just a tool that you can use with a group that allows people who may need time, a little bit more time to ponder their ideas, or folks that might tend to be quieter in more open kind of popcorn brainstorming sessions, for those folks to actually be able to contribute. So essentially, you have 6 people, so it's called 6-3-5, so 6 people, and each person writes down 3 ideas, and then they pass the paper to their right, and then the person next to them kind of builds on their ideas and produces 3 more ideas. And so the paper kind of goes around the table 5 times. And essentially, at the end of the activity, with each paper being passed, you're able to kind of walk away with about 90 ideas that you then can filter down with the group. So just kind of keeping in mind that idea of not everyone is the extrovert and just has ideas that they're just ready to spout out or need to talk through, and really being cognizant of that in moving forward when we're brainstorming. Let individuals work alone first, and kind of taking our time, not just to latch on one idea, but really broadening the creative process to some maybe more out of the box thinking. Another common strategy that folks can use, especially if you seem to be getting a lot of the same ideas, is to challenge folks to draw or sculpt their ideas. So bring some Play-Doh and have your problem statement or the question that you want answered, and have people actually either draw or sculpt their solution to that. Next slide. And so with the narrowing, we kind of just did a little bit of that in the activity that we just did with the prioritization. So we, as a group, kind of listed a whole bunch of behaviors, and then I asked you as the facilitator to pick your top 3. And so that gives folks, you know, a contribution to what decisions are being made and what ideas are kind of being put forward. If you were doing this in person, you could have people just make a star with a marker. If you're working on like posters or little circle dots, they can either spend spend all their dots in one place because they really like a particular idea, or they can kind of spread those dots across ideas. And then also in kind of, especially if you're in a problem solving mode, kind of going through the pros and cons, or the plus and minus of moving forward with a particular idea. Going through the process of having folks actually write down on a sticky or have that verbal conversation about the pros and cons helps the team to really identify, you know, what is it that they are really hoping and needing out of this process, and gives them time to kind of think through and narrow down their thinking before moving to having to make a decision. Next slide. And then, of course, decision making, as Melanie and I have both stated, being really transparent about what the decision making process is within your team or within the project as a whole. So will decisions be made through a majority vote? So all the ideas are put on the table, everybody shoots up their hand, the highest number of hands wins the vote, and then that action carries forward. Is it going to be a group consensus? And the idea here with consensus, it doesn't mean that everyone is fully on board. People may have small reservations, but are still willing to kind of move in good faith with the rest of the group forward with a particular decision or solution to a problem. One of the resources that we'll send to you after the webinar are some discussion cards that I've used in the past. And so that's a nice kind of kinesthetic way for folks to contribute in a conversation. There's 4 different cards. One is green, meaning that you support, or you support with minor points of contention. Red is I'm not on board and I'm willing to fight about it. Yellow is I'm a little uncomfortable with this and would like to discuss it further. And then white is abstain. So it helps people without a person being attacked. We're focusing more on the process and the ideas being put forward, and folks feeling able to say, I'm a little, I want to talk more, or I really need to talk more. So it allows for that conversation to happen. And then folks at the end can vote whether they've reached consensus or not. And in that case, you would just see the green or the white cards remaining. And then leader's choice, of course. Again, leader's choice can be a couple different things. It can be the leader is just the decision maker with no input from the team. Or it could be a situation where the leader is saying, I would like your input, and then based on your input, I will consider it, and I will be the one making the final decision, but really being clear so that there's no unrest afterwards for how decisions are going to be made. Next slide. And then many of us know from all the meetings that we've been in, and it has come up through the different chat contributions that folks have put in, we kind of have some common meeting personalities. So we've got the talker, the person who, just either works through their thinking outwardly to the rest of the group, or seems to dominate the conversation and we're not hearing from others. So these are just some things that you might say as a facilitator to kind of move the conversation along. So with that talker, thanks so much for your input and engagement. What do others think? We also have the naysayer, the person who may always be coming with the problem, but not the solution. And so really kind of honing that person in and reminding them of the goal of the meeting or the goal of the particular topic that you're discussing. So let's focus on how this might work for a moment before we get into potential drawbacks, or kind of moving and kind of challenging them to come up with that solution. What suggestions do you have for working around that? And then lastly, the person who may tend to add something to the conversation that isn't on focus or is distracting. So let's table that for now and move on with our agenda. And sometimes having the parking lot, like a poster or a piece of paper, a place where you can put things that you want to acknowledge that people have said, but you need to come to them at a later time so that you're respecting the group as a whole and the purpose of the meeting that you're in. That parking lot can be a really useful tool. Next slide. And then with evaluation, you can do this really quick on the fly at the end of the meeting, thumbs up, thumbs down. You can have this little emoticon scale that's shown here in the graphic. Keep change, or a more extensive paper survey, obviously, if there's targeted things that you really want to learn whether people are engaging with or feel valuable. And then the I like, I wish, I wonder, it comes out of the CCI Catalyst project. So essentially, I like, what did folks like? I wish, those are the things that could be improved. And then the wonder gets into kind of people's questions or curiosities. All right, so the last part of our phase is the follow-up phase. And so with this, the most important piece is just to make sure that we walk the walk and talk the talk. We are trying to motivate people in between meetings. We're trying to keep them informed. And that we're showing that we are actually achieving the action. So what does that look like? We're tracking and coordinating the completion of action items. We're compiling and listing topics for the next meeting. We're recording and using evaluation input to improve our meeting experience for our participants. And we're recognizing the team accomplishments and contributions. Next slide. And so these are just some ways, simple ways to do that. This one in the upper hand corner was a competition that Open Door Community Health Center did, where they challenged their care teams to make the best QI or quality improvement board. So we got a fun activity that folks were engaged in. And then the team would update this board on a regular basis. You could simply just have, setting a manageable goal and have that little thermometer and how's the team doing and constantly kind of updating that. So it just doesn't become something that people are walking by, but it's something dynamic and eye-catching and simple that folks can kind of check in on. The simple little to-do that you can use with stickies, sticky notes of what's happening in the team and tracking where folks are at with those action items there in the bottom left. And then the bottom right, again, just fun activities that are celebrating the successes of what folks are doing. So that's just a picture of a team party that had happened after folks had reached their goal of improving how blood pressures were being taken within their health center. And so recognition of the team's accomplishments. So with that, we have come to the end, and here's our contact information. So post the webinar, if you have any questions or want more information, you can reach out to any of the three of us here. And then we do want to open it up for the last remaining time we have together for any questions. And you can chat those questions in, or you can unmute yourself and ask them.
And while we're waiting for people to think about some of their questions, I also want to say, we did mention this a couple times, we'll get some of these resources out to you via email. We'd also love to hear, what we didn't include in this that you have used in the past that have made your team meetings really effective. So are there other tools, are there other activities that you've used that you would recommend? And we'd love to gather some resources and share them. So feel free to send us your ideas as well.
And lastly, if there are no questions, if we could ask folks one last time within the chat to give either a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or some sort of feedback about the webinar today, what you really liked, what you wished was here, or things you wonder about.
So as people are thinking about that, we did have a question come through that I'll read. So one question was, how best to manage too many or multiple goals for a meeting? So I think I'll take a start at that question, and then Tricia, feel free to jump in. I think it's a great question because often we have a lot we want to accomplish as a team. And I think it goes back to prioritizing. So in terms of too many goals, I think depending on how much time you have, if it's a short meeting, that 15 or 30-minute meeting, you probably only want to set one real goal for that. So that may be checking in on a PDSA, that may be making a smaller level decision on something related to your project. If you have more time and you can tackle maybe more than one goal, I think it's okay to do that. I think the important thing is to make sure you do give enough time to those discussions that need to happen, because building in time to your meetings so that people can explore their feelings, their thoughts and ideas is really important. So giving that the time it deserves. Tricia, any other thoughts on how to balance, maybe multiple goals for a meeting?
Yeah, I guess I would say sometimes things are just required. So I do want to acknowledge that. And as Melanie said, just the idea of prioritization, I think it's better to do less and get a better result than to try to cram a whole bunch of things in that people end up walking away feeling like, did we accomplish anything? Or kind of feeling like there's 5 loose ends now, rather than maybe just that you were able to deal with that one thing. So I think that prioritization process is so key to creating the value and actually moving the project forward effectively.
And I think we're getting some feedback that it might be hard to unmute lines. So Tricia, do you want to go ahead and unmute all the lines now?
Yeah.
And that way, folks, if you do have a comment, you're able to make that on the line. So everyone now is unmuted. Any final questions or thoughts as we wrap up today's webinar?
No questions, thank you.
All right. And we had some good comments coming in. Thanks for sharing. And we do like challenges for our team. So having some kind of a challenge that a team can accomplish always does help. So yes, thank you. Well, we'll say thank you to everyone for your time and for joining us today. We appreciate it, and keep those meetings fun. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Close it off. At the bottom, there's a little red button that says leave meeting.
Leave meeting.